Well, thank you to all of our speakers. As before, I'll start with a couple of questions. While I'm doing this and while my panelists are answering these questions, please get your own questions ready. The question cards are on the table and we'll be collecting those and bringing them up. But let me start off. Again, thank you all. Rob, you mentioned climate change, and Mayor Ferguson, you touched on it as well. I think it's fair to say that Europe has made more progress, is well ahead of the U.S. response to climate change, to the challenge posed by climate change, despite a flurry of activity in the last year since Superstorm Sandy. But in the context specifically of urban regeneration, what do you think has been learned so far with respect to the policy response or to the physical innovations that we've seen in Europe, and what might that portend for our experience? Rob, you start?
I think what we have learned in the Netherlands is that it's not only about hard structures. In the disaster we had in 1953, we had our Delta works. I mean, that was all about dams, dikes, water barriers, etc. Now we like to build much more with the idea that maybe you could give water more space. So there's a beautiful project in Nijmegen, Room for the River. And the river gets more space. At the same time, you build on the quays, on the waterfront. And there's a lot of real estate development potential probably in the near future. So that's one example. The other example is what we call the sand motor. It's we move around a lot with sand in order to increase the height of our, let's say, our dunes. Now nowadays we try to put sand on a particular place and let the current and the wind do the work. That's being called the sand motor. Those are ideas we discussed, for instance, with New Jersey. What we can learn from the United States is your preparedness for emergencies. What I said in my introduction is we feel safe behind that system. We do not insure our houses. We don't make the calculation when you buy a house, oh, well, this is lying in that place, maybe if there is a flood, I'm in trouble. So our ministers now, and especially our mayors now, try to convince people, look, I mean, we also need to prepare if there is a disaster. And that's what we hope to learn from you, from the United States.
It cuts both ways. I think we probably want to reallocate risk here so that homeowners and other property owners are more cognizant of the risks as well and willing to absorb those costs. Corinne, from the EC's perspective, same question.
From the EC perspective, what we learn from urban regeneration is what we call the integrated approach, which I think is also known in US, but maybe not at is the fact that if you go on with urban regeneration operation, you must link the various dimensions of urban development. So the social dimension, the economic dimension, the cultural dimension. For example, in Rotterdam, most urban operation couldn't happen if you would ignore the fact that there are more than 200 nationalities in Rotterdam. So it's the multicultural dimension. And now more and more the environmental dimension, because I think that I didn't mention it as a challenge, but people still have not taken stock of the fact that it's not just about energy efficient housing. It's more. Cities as living organisms have to take into account what we call the ecosystem services, so the importance of urban design, the importance of trees to avoid air conditioning. So to have all these various dimensions integrated. So it's integration. So across silos, across services, across levels of governance, across all the dimensions. And I think it's important. And it's still not very well implemented because there are still, as you say in the US, for a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And there is still this syndrome everywhere that for people who are just looking at technology, everything looks like technology. For the people who look for environment, sometimes there is nothing apart from environmental rational. So it's important to really link and make these people work together.
Great. Thank you. There's a series of questions here from the audience that relate to open space. And one of our audience members observes that none of the panelists in the previous panel, may have been the construction of the panel, but none of the panelists mentioned the importance of open space, but all three of you did. Let me maybe pose the question first to Mayor Ferguson. In your thinking about a city, what role does open space play, and what specific policies have you either created in your first year, or do you envision creating to enhance the management and productivity or benefits of that open space?
Yeah, I mean, open space is extremely important to people's well-being. What I envisage is linking all our open spaces. We're quite rich in open spaces in Bristol, probably richer than almost any other city in the UK. Apart from we don't have royal parks like London does, but we have some pretty good ones. And we've got these little pocket parks as well. And what I envisage doing is creating greenways between the spaces, so that everybody can easily walk and cycle all around the city between all those open spaces, and that you have wildlife corridors. So that is green open space. But what I think is really important is that people have places to gather, and that every community is in a way defined by the space that people gather in at the heart of that community. That might be the high street, it might be a square, it might be a park, but and some of our poorest communities actually do gather around parks, and that's that enriches their lives and brilliantly. But I think accessibility is the most important thing, and we do suffer transport poverty from some people who can't afford the transport to get from one place to another, so easing that is really important.
Other comments on open space? Corinne or Rob?
We are more using the notion of public spaces. So to give, I think we had an example yesterday in visiting Pittsburgh of an area which was just dedicated to parking spaces, and they managed to recover this area, and when they negotiated with people, it seemed out of reach because people wanted to park their car, and finally they managed to make a very nice green spaces with benches, a place where people can sit and stay. Same in Vitoria-Gasteiz in Europe, which has been also awarded Green Capital for Europe. They managed to really transform completely the city center and to keep the cars out. At the beginning, all people were against, but now all people realize that in a compact city like Vitoria-Gasteiz, this new space for pedestrian is something wonderful, and it's a very place for, like in the pictures shown by Mayor Ferguson, place where people can stay and enjoy life.
There's a question here from the audience, I think for you, Corinne, about US and EU institutional mechanisms for fostering partnerships or relationships between metropolitan areas in Europe and in the US. Do such programs exist? Do you think they'd be beneficial?
In fact, the notion of metropolitan area and metropolitan governance in Europe depends very much of the country. In some countries like France, where you have a very high number of local authorities, 36,000 local authorities, municipalités, we say, there are groupings of municipalities which work together, and sometimes at the metropolitan level you have also new levels of governance. In Germany you have the metropolitan regionen, you have also other levels, and depending on the country, the metropolitan level of governance wouldn't have necessarily neither the same founding capacity, neither the same competences. So it varies very much, but it's obvious that everywhere it's considered as a challenge. It's to be able to have a metropolitan level of governance which can work in interaction with the other levels of governance.
Mayor Ferguson, you're obviously a student of cities. How do you use intercontinental networks? Or is it a formal thing, or is it simply your own curiosity?
Well, we have some formal things, and actually the European Commission are very good at forcing partnerships, because a lot of the grants that the European Commission give for various, or a lot of the incentives they give, are dependent on, say, 3 cities across Europe getting together. It might be one Eastern European, one Southern European, and one Northern European. And we've worked like that, and it forms some extremely good partnerships. We have we have twinning of cities across Europe. We are twinned with Bordeaux and Hanover, for instance. But our metropolitan areas are, certainly in the UK, are run by negotiation rather than by, I mean, I'm the mayor of 500,000 or just under 500,000 people in a metropolitan area of 1 million. And so with 3 surrounding authorities. So I have to tread on eggshells in dealing with metropolitan issues, which is a weakness.
Rob, did you have something?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's time we start also with maybe a more serious model of twinning of cities, because, I mean, let's face it, and I've seen it in my 35 years career, it's also a lot of, it's nice to travel, you know, and it's nice to have all those placards and the beginning of a municipality. But I mean, there's a lot to gain and a lot, when, for instance, people from New York would be offered a temporary job in Rotterdam to work out some models and concepts, and the other way around. And it's happening already. And I think in some of the foundations, the Clinton, Rockefeller, I understand also Marshall, are building on models where there's more intensive cooperation between cities.
Yes.
So,
I've invented the idea of tuning with cities, so musical cities, and we're a very musical city, so we're going to tune with New Orleans. And we have a jazz and blues festival. So I think there are other ways. So we don't want twinning that is just fixed and formal. I think we'll have greening with cities and other ways of engaging with cities.
We're awash in questions here, so and they're all good. But let me ask a broad question about the next several years. You know, we're still engaged in this recovery from this global financial crisis, and you know, there's 2 broad trends I think that we observe from here about Europe. One is an increasingly diverse population, and the other is the imposition of austerity measures. In light of what we talked about, the value of social cohesion. How do you see this playing out? Is it likely to lead to fundamentally different attitudes toward risk or toward innovation or toward the other things that can drive city regeneration? Or is this more of a threat?
Austerity?
Whichever. Rob, Corinne, Mayor Ferguson.
I think it's a threat because it's a threat on cities' capacity cities' margin of maneuver. So we must see 2 different things, and it varies very much in Europe according to cities. There are richer cities and less rich cities, but even in the richer cities or cities which have much power, like in the Nordic countries, like in Sweden or in Norway, as they have many competencies, in a way they may also have a very reduced margin of maneuver. And in many cities which have difficulties, as I said, because they have an aging population or a shrinking population and less local tax, there is a real financial issue which will hit all the challenges and the transition to innovation, because if you want a good transition to innovation, you have to have some margin of maneuver. And if cities always take the burden of problems and not have the financial resources to handle them, if the cities have to always manage the negative externalities of what happens and don't have the financial capacity to handle, I think we will end with a big problem.
Anything to add, Rob?
yeah, I think I've been a civil servant and someone in public administration for most of my working life. And at the end of this career, I realized more and more that, I mean, it's a little bit maybe a slogan, but it's not so much about government, but about governance. And it's by giving space and do away with a lot of rules and regulations and bringing common sense. And the other day I had the great fortune to show the mayor of Rotterdam around for 3 days in New York. And he went to the former police commissioner of Giuliani, Bill Breton. He went to the Harlem Children's Zone. And I saw how practical this man is. And I saw him, without authority, exchanging views with experts in the Harlem Children's Zone. And to discuss with Bill Breton issues on security and community policing. But also we went to the harbor and to safety and in the harbor. And this summer, and then I stopped, this summer I heard from various circles from my friends in Rotterdam and Amsterdam spontaneously saying, what a fantastic mayors we have. And people in Amsterdam always complain, and always complain about the mayor. And then I thought, we are on the right track.
Yeah, the first thing I did was make friends with the cab drivers, because I wanted people to be able to get in the cab in Bristol and them to be positive about the mayor.
Sounds great. Final question. We were touching on leadership there, and leadership and governance, very, very critical. So we'll close with a question for the mayor. How important is it for architects to run for and be elected to political office?
Well, I think we have a lot of the skills that are right. And actually, I think some of the worst politicians are the people who set out to be politicians. And so I feel very comfortable in the job. I think that because I've been an urbanist and an architect, it gives me a certain advantage. But I think what I would say is that I've always put people before buildings. And I think there would be a danger if you had an architect who always put buildings before people. And so, yes, but I think it's a great idea. And the mayor of Malmo was an architect who's just recently retired, and he was excellent. I think we had a club of 2 in Europe of architect mayors, but there's a great tradition of them in South America, and they've done a brilliant job.
Well, please join me in thanking all of our panelists.